David sat slouched on a park bench in Central Park, the cold wind needling through his overcoat like it had something personal against him. The sky hung heavy and gray above him, mirroring the storm churning inside. His tie was loose, his briefcase forgotten at his feet, and his phone buzzed uselessly in his pocket, calls from his wife, his boss, maybe even his grown kids. He didn't want to hear any of it. Just this morning, he'd been a man with a title, an office, and a sense of direction. Now he was just another face in the crowd, jobless, stunned, and drifting in a city that didn't have time for personal crises. 20 years. 2 decades of early mornings, late nights, missed birthdays, and tight deadlines, gone in a 10-minute meeting. Downsizing, they called it. It's not personal, they said. But it felt personal. Around him, life moved on. A jogger zipped past, earbuds in, oblivious. A couple laughed, sharing a hot pretzel. David watched them with a strange mix of envy and numbness. He felt invisible, like a man fading out of his own life. Everything that had defined him, his work, his routines, his sense of purpose, was slipping through his fingers like snowflakes that never stuck. For the first time in years, he had nowhere to go and no one expecting him. It was a strange kind of freedom, one that didn't feel liberating at all. His hands trembled slightly from the cold, or maybe it was the shock. He wasn't sure anymore. The park bench was just a place to sit, but right now, it felt like an island in a sea of indifference. And as the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of winter, David realized he had never felt so completely alone. A light snowfall had begun, soft flakes drifting down like pieces of silence. David hadn't moved. He stared blankly ahead, lost in a fog of regrets and questions he couldn't answer. His breath hung in the air, curling like smoke before vanishing into nothing. The cold bit deeper now, not just into his skin, but into the space inside him that used to feel alive. Then, from somewhere beside him, came a soft voice, barely more than a whisper. "You look cold, mister, you can use my blanket." David turned, startled. Standing just a few feet away was a little girl, no older than 10. Her coat was far too thin, and the sleeves stopped short of her wrists. Her sneakers were worn, the soles patched with duct tape. Her cheeks were pink from the wind, her eyes wide and kind. In her small hands, she held out a blanket, faded, frayed, and clearly cherished. For a moment, David couldn't speak. The absurdity of it struck him hard. She was homeless. A child. And here she was, offering him comfort. I'm okay, he managed to say, but his voice cracked. The girl tilted her head. "You don't look okay." Her words weren't judgmental. Just observant. Honest. The kind of truth kids seem to speak so effortlessly. She didn't ask for anything, didn't seem afraid. Just stood there with her offering, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to give something, even when you had almost nothing. David looked down at the blanket. It smelled faintly of the street, of old smoke and concrete. But it was warm. And right now, it felt like the most human thing anyone had done for him in a very, very long time. David scooted over slightly, making room on the bench, and the girl sat beside him without hesitation. The blanket now rested on both their laps, warming legs that had no business being out in the cold. For a long moment, neither spoke. Snow continued to fall gently around them, muting the city's usual clamor. "What's your name?" David asked, his voice low. "Lily," she said, rubbing her hands together. "What's yours?" "David." She nodded like she'd expected something simple and solid like that. He hesitated, then glanced at her, careful not to sound too direct. "Where are your parents, Lily?" She didn't flinch. Didn't look away. "It's just me now," she said, with a shrug and a soft smile. "But I'm okay. People help sometimes. And I help too, when I can." David blinked. You help? Sure, she said. A lady last week didn't have any food. I shared my sandwich. It wasn't big, but she smiled like it was the best thing ever. Sometimes a little good is enough, you know? He didn't know. Not until this moment. He studied her face, dirt smudged her cheek, and her nose was red from the cold, but her eyes shone with something rare. Not just survival. Not pity. Hope. You don't seem angry, he said, almost to himself. Lily looked up at him. What's the point of being angry? That won't keep you warm. She laughed lightly, then added, besides, everyone's got hard stuff. Some people just hide it better. David felt something shift inside him, something slow, but real. This girl had every reason to hate the world, but here she was, sharing warmth, offering comfort. And somehow, her way of seeing people, choosing to see the good, made his problems feel smaller, even solvable. He hadn't expected that. The park dimmed as dusk folded itself over the city. Streetlights flickered on, casting soft halos on the snowy paths. David could feel the cold creeping up through the bench, settling in his bones. Lily sat beside him quietly, legs swinging slightly, eyes watching the snow as if it were some old friend. He looked down at the blanket still draped across them, then turned to her. You should keep this, he said, gently lifting it from his lap. You need it more than I do. But Lily shook her head and pushed it back into his hands, firm and matter-of-fact. No, she said. You look like you need it more right now. David opened his mouth to protest, but stopped. His throat tightened, and something heavy pressed behind his eyes. He turned away, blinking fast, but a tear slipped down anyway, tracing the crease beside his nose. No one's cared in a long time, he whispered, more to himself than her. Lily didn't react with surprise or pity. She just smiled, quiet, kind, knowing. Sometimes, she said, you just gotta be the one who starts caring. Her words hit deeper than she probably knew. They cut through the fog in his mind, through the numbness in his heart. All day, he'd been spiraling, defined by what he'd lost, trapped in what he couldn't fix. But this child, with nothing to her name but a threadbare blanket and an open heart, had chosen to care anyway. In that moment, something inside David cracked open, not in pain, but in release. The weight hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't alone. He was seen. And somehow, that made all the difference. A week had passed, but David hadn't stopped thinking about her, not for a second. The little girl with the brave eyes and the torn coat had haunted his thoughts in the best way. She'd given him more than a blanket that day. She'd given him perspective. Purpose. A reason to care again. And so, on this brisk winter afternoon, he returned to the same bench, this time carrying a backpack full of warm clothes, sandwiches, a thermos of soup, and something else wrapped neatly in brown paper. He sat and waited. Minutes passed. Then he saw her, Lily, walking with that same uneven stride, head down, shoulders tight against the wind. When her eyes met his, she stopped. You came back, she said, surprised but smiling. I told you I would, David replied. I have something for you. She approached cautiously, still guarded, still proud. He handed her the food first. Then the coat, gloves, and boots. She accepted them quietly, her eyes wide with disbelief. Finally, he pulled out the bundle and gently unwrapped it, a thick, brand-new blanket. Soft, warm, and deep blue. He knelt beside her and draped it over her shoulders with care. This time, he said softly, you looked cold. For a long second, Lily just stood there, staring at him. Her lower lip trembled, not from the cold this time, but from something deeper. Then, in the smallest voice, she whispered, "Thank you, mister." You remembered. David smiled through damp eyes. He had remembered. And he'd finally started becoming the kind of man who wouldn't forget. In that quiet corner of the city, two people sat on a bench, once strangers, now stitched together by kindness. And as the snow began to fall again, it didn't feel quite as cold anymore. Conclusion. In the heart of a restless city, where millions pass without seeing each other, one quiet moment of compassion changed everything. David, a man broken by loss and blinded by despair, found unexpected warmth not in wealth or status, but in the simple, selfless kindness of a child who had nothing to give but a worn-out blanket and an open heart. Lily's generosity, quiet, unshaken by her own circumstances, sparked something powerful. It reminded David that healing doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes, it begins with a whisper. A shared blanket. A choice to care when it's easier not to. This story is a reminder that no act of kindness is too small, and no one is ever too lost to be found again. Compassion costs nothing, but it can mean everything. And sometimes, the people we think we're helping are the ones who save us first. In a world that often feels divided and indifferent, we all have the power to be someone's warm place in the cold. Just like Lily. Just like David chose to become. Because humanity isn't about how much we have, it's about how much we're willing to give.